Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's End the Filibuster National Town Hall. My name is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and I'm so proud to be the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and a special thank you to our panelists, including Senator Padilla, Congresswoman Bush, Congressman Caston, and several powerful organizers who are leading our movement on the outside to finally eliminate the racist, arcane filibuster and deliver for the people. Just 1 week ago, President Biden finished his first 100 days in office. As he addressed the nation, he outlined the incredible life-saving work that his administration had accomplished so far, from shots in arms and money in pockets to a historic slate of executive actions on a range of issues that Congress has passed and the president has signed. Today, as chairwoman of the 95-member Congressional Progressive Caucus, I want to share what we've accomplished in the House during that same time. We passed the For the People Act to end voter suppression and get big money out of politics. We passed the Equality Act, and we passed the DREAM Act. We passed the Paycheck Fairness Act to guarantee equal pay for equal work. We passed gun safety legislation to save lives. We passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act to take on police brutality, and we passed DC statehood. We passed environmental legislation to protect our public lands and save our planet, the PRO Act to empower unions and rebuild our middle class, the Raise the Wage Act to guarantee at least $15 an hour and a dignified life to every worker in America, and a number of immigration bills from the Dream and Promise Act, the No Ban Act, the Access to Counsel Acts to protect civil rights and civil liberties. And that is not even the entire list. Every one of these bills is urgent. Every one is necessary, and every one is popular. But Mitch McConnell has already said that the GOP's only job and top priority is to block 100% of this people's agenda. And you know what? He can do it because of this procedural tool in the Senate called the filibuster, a tool that allows for the tyranny of the minority, a tool that our country's framers did not include in their vision, a tool that was only instituted much, much later by Southern segregationists as a way to stop important civil rights legislation from passing the Senate. And so that is why we are calling on the Senate to repeal the Jim Crow filibuster and stop allowing Mitch McConnell to have the power to block any and every piece of the people's agenda. In November, voters across America delivered Democrats the White House, the Senate, and the House, a clear mandate for transformative change to lift everyone up across the country. But if we don't repeal the filibuster, then we continue to allow Mitch and a small minority of people to obstruct the passage of bills that otherwise have widespread support. So if we're going to deliver on the bold and meaningful reforms that our communities need, the filibuster must go. It's voting rights or the filibuster. It's a $15 minimum wage or the filibuster. It's humane immigration reform or the filibuster. It's LGBTQ plus equality or the filibuster. It's racial justice or the filibuster. Tonight and during our nationwide filibuster week of action, people made their choice clear. Get rid of the filibuster and get delivering for America. Our call for reform is not new or radical. Over the years, the Senate has updated its rules in response to the needs of the times. In 1975, the Senate lowered the threshold for ending a filibuster to 60 senators. In 2013, the Republican Senate eliminated the filibuster entirely for federal executive branch appointees and judicial appointments, and most recently eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees. These reforms indicate an increasing acknowledgement that the filibuster is an obstruction to the regular duties and responsibilities that members of Congress have to the voters who sent us here on their behalf. And that's why we're calling on the Senate to take immediate action. And we're not alone. 2 weeks ago, nearly 100 of my colleagues from across the Democratic caucus, led by Congresswoman Cori Bush, urged the Senate to end the filibuster. This week, over 20 members of Congress have joined outside groups and hosting events across the country with our constituents, where we're discussing the countless ways in which the filibuster is blocking progress on the issues that we care about most. And this is just the start of our work to build the momentum we need to finally bring change to the Senate. So thank you again to everyone who's tuning in tonight. Thank you for standing up, speaking out, and organizing for an end to the filibuster, an end to Mitch McConnell's obstruction, and a beginning to sending popular policies to President Biden's desk that will make a real difference in the lives of everyone throughout America. We have some incredible speakers tonight who will be joining us live to discuss the need to end the filibuster. Soon we'll be hearing from California Senator Alex Padilla, Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri, Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois, NAACP President Derek Johnson, MoveOn's Ronna Epting, Maurice Mitchell of the Working Families Party, President of the Association of Flight Attendants Sarah Nelson, and Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign. And we're also going to hear from a few of the millions of Americans who have been personally impacted by the fact that the filibuster stops necessary policy from being accomplished, including those who can speak firsthand on the urgency of enacting voting rights reform, LGBTQ plus protections, common sense gun safety laws, and creating an economy where no one works for poverty wages and every rank and file worker enjoys good benefits and a voice in the workplace with strong union representation. Now, before we get to our remarkable panelists, I'd like to have former Senate staffer Adam Gentleson, author of Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy, briefly provide some historical context for what we're trying to accomplish.
Adam Gentleson here, author of Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy. I just wanted to make a few quick points about the filibuster. The first is that the framers never wanted anything like the filibuster to exist, and they were very clear about this. They were clear because they had experience with what happens when you impose a supermajority threshold in Congress under the Articles of Confederation. The version of Congress under the Articles had a supermajority threshold, and it was a total disaster. So when they crafted the Constitution, including the Senate, the framers were very clear that every major decision point, except for the small number that they enumerated in the Constitution, such as removal from office and amending the Constitution, all other decision points should be majority rule, including in the Senate. This is the way the Senate operated for the first half century of its existence. The framers were trying to strike a delicate balance between majority rule, which James Madison described as the Republican principle, small r Republican, between a balance of majority rule and minority rights. They crafted this by creating other checks and balances in the system, 3 branches of government, having the Senate be senators be responsive to statewide constituencies, serve longer terms, have the elections in the Senate be staggered so that only a third of the body was up every 2 years. These were the checks that they put in place to protect the fear of untrammeled majority rule, which they did hold and provide protections for the minority. What happened through the course of the 19th century was that innovative obstructionists, primarily Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, started to innovate what would become known as the filibuster as a means of shifting this balance and tilting it towards the rights of the minority to block things. If the framers had wanted the minority to have a voice in the Senate, Calhoun wanted the minority to have a veto, and he was explicit about this. And so that is why he forged what we would today recognize as the talking filibuster. However, all through the 19th century, the Senate continued to be a majority rule body well into the 20th century. So everything we think of as the golden age of the Senate passed on majority rule basis. The Missouri Compromise, for instance, squeaked by about 2 votes. So if it had to clear a supermajority, it would not have passed. In the Jim Crow era, senators started finding the ability to basically graft a supermajority threshold onto the talking filibuster. They used the introduction of Rule 22, which was introduced in 1917, to start imposing a supermajority threshold, but they only applied it consistently to civil rights during this period. From the end of Reconstruction in 1877 until the passage of the first major civil rights bill in 1964, the only category of legislation that was consistently killed by the filibuster were civil rights. Civil rights was ready to be passed during this period. Bills to end lynching, bills to end poll taxes, and bills to end workplace discrimination were passing the House of Representatives by wide margins, coming over to the Senate where they had majority support, and they had the support of presidents of both parties ready and willing to sign them. Civil rights bills during this period also had broad public support. A Gallup poll in 1937 found that 72% of the American people were in support of a bill to end lynching. In the 1940s, Gallup found that upwards of 60% of the American people supported a bill to end poll taxes. The only thing that stopped these bills from passing were filibusters in the Senate led by Southern senators openly committed to the maintenance of white supremacy. That is why civil rights bills did not pass, and that is the racist history of the filibuster. Today, the filibuster is used to protect the forces of the status quo and entrenched powerful interests against progressive change. Even though it has lost its direct connection to civil rights, this filibuster is still used to maintain the power of entrenched powerful interests and serves the conservative side far more than the progressive side. A study by the Center for American Progress found that the filibuster is used about twice as often to block Democratic priorities as it is used by Democrats to block Republican priorities. A recent study by the Roosevelt Institute found that it is used to maintain corporate power over workers' rights. The filibuster has expanded far beyond anything that the framers ever anticipated, and today it is the primary source creating gridlock in our federal government and blocking Congress from delivering the results that the American people elected them to deliver. One other thing that we've learned in recent history is that voters do not care about why the party in power fails to deliver results. They only care whether those results are delivered or not. The filibuster is what is standing in the way of Congress effectively providing thoughtful policy solutions to the challenges we face today, and that is why it needs to be reformed.
Wonderful. Well, with that wonderful overview by Adam Gentleson, it's now my great honor and privilege to introduce Senator Alex Padilla. Senator Padilla is a son of working class immigrants and a lifelong public servant, and so he's deeply aware of the policies that need to pass in order to give all people a fair shot at the American dream. Yet no matter how hard he works to serve the great state of California in the United States Senate, the filibuster will stand in the way of passing popular progressive policies. Senator Padilla, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Congressmember Jayapal, for inviting me to participate tonight and for your dedication and activism to end the filibuster. Clearly, we are living in a critical moment of change. Not only are we beginning the process of recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, right, a once-in-a-century global health pandemic, but we're also finally confronting some of our country's deepest structural crises, from the injustices of systemic racism and voter suppression, which we've been talking about, to the need for immigration reform, and how to turn the corner on unnecessary gun violence, and of course the existential threat of climate change. There's so much that we need to act on, and we need to act boldly, and we need to act urgently. Inaction is not an option. And the American people know that we can't afford to wait any longer on so many of these priorities. That's the biggest reason why the country elected President Biden and Vice President Harris this last November. And that's why, as you mentioned earlier, we have majorities in both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. So the way I see it, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make real progress, big progress. And I believe we have a mandate from the American people to do so. But Senate Republicans are clinging to the filibuster in their ongoing attempt to obstruct progress and obstruct change. You gave several examples of how the House has already passed legislation to improve people's lives, from raising the minimum wage. The House passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. The House has already passed bills that will provide a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers, for TPS holders, for farm workers. And you've acted on common sense gun safety reform. Another one that's very personal for me. The House has passed the For the People Act, which provides critical protections for our fundamental voting rights. Why that's being relitigated in the year 2021 is beyond me, but we are, and we must. All of these efforts, all of this common sense policy should be overwhelmingly bipartisan. In fact, they all do enjoy bipartisan support from the American people. But clear majorities of Americans know that we need to act urgently to stop climate change in particular. Americans also want common sense gun reform and the federal minimum wage to be increased to $15 an hour. The right to vote and to see your vote reflected in policy and in government is the bedrock of our democracy. But the Senate filibuster rule means that a majority isn't enough to pass any of this critical legislation. The filibuster is fundamentally undemocratic. It's a relic of white supremacy, and it was used not just repeatedly to block our country's progress toward equality in the Jim Crow era, it continues to have that impact to this very day. And this past year has shown that we can't afford to let justice wait any longer. Our communities can't wait. Our children can't wait. And we as a people cannot wait for change. Our agenda is too full and too urgent for Mitch McConnell just to want to give his blessing to any particular policy. We can't let any one person stand in the way of our democracy and our progress. So that's why I'm proud to be in this fight to end the filibuster. I always welcome Republican senators to weigh in on
legislation that helps the American people. Working on a bipartisan basis is always the preferred approach, but when they're not willing to genuinely engage, we can't afford to wait. We can't let our country's future be held hostage by a minority in the Senate. So as part of the Democratic majority in the Senate right now, I'm committed to delivering real progress to the American people. And I believe that by delivering on our promises, we'll maintain, if not strengthen, our majority. We'll earn the opportunity for continued majority and continued leadership. So I'm calling on all of my colleagues to end the filibuster and enable us to build a more just future for all. So to you, Congressmember Jayapal, and to everybody participating tonight, thank you for your advocacy and for your leadership in this critical fight. Together, we can and will make progress. In the meantime, continue to stay safe, everyone.
Thank you so much, Senator Padilla, for all your work and for joining us tonight and for all of your help in pushing forward these policies. Now it's my great honor and privilege to introduce one of my colleagues, Congressman Casten from the great state of Illinois' 6th Congressional District. We're so grateful that you're here with us tonight and that you're organizing alongside us to end the filibuster. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to see you, Pramila, Congresswoman Jayapal, I should say, and really appreciate all of your leadership on this issue. So I got to just start by telling a little bit of a personal story. I just started my 2nd term in Congress, and when I first decided to run, my cousin, who used to work at Forterra in Seattle in your area, said, "Oh, you got to come out here and meet a bunch of my friends." And so we went out, and this was a campaign side event, and I realized this is official. But ended up just meeting a lovely group of people out there in Seattle, including Dennis Hayes, and spending a long time talking about the issue nearest and dearest to my heart, which is climate change. I've spent 20 years before running for Congress building a number of clean energy companies, and basically decided to run for Congress because I didn't feel like I could pull big enough levers in the private sector for the scale of what had to be done. And about 2 weeks after I left that trip, I got an email back from Dennis and a bunch of my hosts and said, "Oh, we just got the whole gang back together. They had a great time talking to you, and we brought in Bill Ruckelshaus to talk about how he basically rescued the EPA from Ann Gorsuch, yes, that Gorsuch, mother of, when he came in to be Reagan's EPA director." Now, I mention that because environmental protection didn't used to be partisan. Bill Ruckelshaus was Nixon's first EPA administrator, essentially created the EPA, and was then the 6th EPA administrator under Reagan. Bill and his protege, Bill Riley, another friend of mine, created the Montreal Protocol, which was a Republican-led global initiative to agree to put a price on pollution and come up with a global trading mechanism, in that case for chlorofluorocarbons, to close the ozone hole. They then used that same model to create a domestic program in the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments to create an acid rain trading program. These are Republican ideas, right? So don't think about this as a partisan battle. The Montreal Protocol passed the Senate 83-6. The Clean Air Act amendments, I believe, may have been unanimous, but it was in the 80s as well. Never was filibustered. And the unfortunately, what happened since is that this became a totally weaponized tool to block progress on climate. And, so fast forward 10 years later, Waxman-Markey was going to try to be passed. And Harry Reid said, it's easy to count to 60 and we don't have the votes. And so we have this problem, which is that here you have something that is overwhelmingly popular with the American people, that is overwhelmingly urgent for the sake of our planet, that people are favorably disposed to across all political persuasions of the country, and take that as a source of great optimism because we got public will. We got the votes in the House. We got the votes in the Senate. The problem is that the Senate, because of the filibuster, is a minoritarian institution. It is not a majoritarian institution. And there are thankfully a minority of senators, not Senator Padilla certainly, but there are a minority of senators who are opposed to the Enlightenment and are still living in a Stone Age worldview of what the world wants to be. Now that's a minority, but we have to fix it to get through. And, I would say take that with inspiration, because that is so true of so many things we face, from immigration reform to gun violence protection to voting rights. All of these things are supported by overwhelming majorities of Americans. And as I said in an event I was on with Adam Gentleson last night, I think the great inspiration of Americans is that we were founded on the idea that as Americans, when we see something is broke, we fix it. We were founded by people who didn't like the situation in their own home countries, and at least the ones who came here volitionally came to fix it and make a better life. The folks who were brought here involuntarily, motivated with the Great Migration to go make a better life. Our founders created a constitution that could be amended. We're not perfect, but we have a tremendous motivation to fix things. And so I would submit to you that we have a patriotic obligation to fix what's broke right now, and that's getting rid of the filibuster. So thank you for leading on this. Thank you for having me, and look forward to seeing you all hopefully out in Seattle again with a crowd of pretty cool people sometime soon.
You're always welcome out here anytime. Thank you so much, Representative Caston. And now it's a really phenomenal honor to welcome somebody who has just been fighting her whole life as a tireless advocate in the streets and now in the halls of Congress. She is tearing it up on every issue and has been such a leader on eliminating the filibuster. Congresswoman Cori Bush from Missouri's 1st Congressional District.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those kind words. It's an honor to serve with you. It really is. And good evening to everyone. St. Louis and I are proud to welcome you to today's gathering, and we express our deepest gratitude to our co-hosts of today's event and our partners in this effort, to Chairwoman of the Progressive Caucus, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, to Congressman Sean Caston, and a huge thank you to Senator Alex Padilla for being here, and to each and every one of our colleagues who are joining us today in linking arms as senators and House members of Congress, and to the numerous amazing groups, grassroots organizations and impacted people who are linking arms with us as well, to say loudly, to say clearly, and to leave absolutely no doubt that the Senate filibuster must be eliminated. My message today is simple. St. Louis sent me here to save lives. St. Louis sent me to Congress because our community has been hurting. We've been hurting for too long, and we need our government to make changes we can feel. St. Louis sent me here for the same reason people all across our country came together to deliver a Democratic White House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House. They need us to save lives. But the thing is, there is this old, outdated, racist rule called the filibuster that has been used to deny basic human rights to people who look like me and people who have struggles like everyday people. And Senate Republicans more concerned with obstruction and more concerned with taking back control to implement a Trump agenda than they are with saving lives. They are continuing in their tradition of weaponizing the filibuster to deny people in America everything we love. In America, we aspire to a society where we all love each other. We love our families, we know that. We love having clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. We love our democracy, and we love those who seek to protect its most fundamental ideals. We aspire to a society that loves equality and one that loves justice. Loves justice. And when it comes to eliminating the filibuster, everything we love is at stake. I've said it before, everything is at stake. Senate Republicans are blocking H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which we could pass right now to reform our democracy and protect our most sacred right to vote. Everything we love, you all, is at stake. Senate Republicans are blocking the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and any efforts to meaningfully address police and community violence. They're blocking common sense gun violence prevention legislation. They're blocking the effort to close the loophole that a white supremacist in South Carolina used to get a gun and murder 9 innocent souls right now. Everything we love is at stake. They're blocking making DC the 51st state, and they're blocking protections for our immigrant community, for our immigrant babies. They're blocking supporting our people's rights at work. They're blocking equal pay for equal work. What the heck? They're blocking the rights of any LGBTQIA plus people to live free from discrimination. They're blocking any progress on saving us from the climate crisis, killing our communities, killing our people. They're blocking every effort to provide health care to millions of people right now, people who look to them for leadership right now. Everything that we love is at stake. Senate Republicans are using the filibuster to deny our people not just everything that we love, but everything that we need in this moment of crisis for our country. When the people elected us with a mandate to transform our society for the better, we must not allow Senate Republicans to deny our people, our folks, the people that look to us, the people that elected us, the people that voted for us, the people that showed up in the midst of a pandemic that proportionally impacts, takes the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks all off the charts. We cannot allow this to happen and deny our people everything that we need to survive. Thank you.
Representative Bush, you have spoken truth to power yet again, and I am so grateful for your leadership. And when we talk about justice and we talk about love, there's another person who has been leading the fight for Moral Mondays across this country, a person who always holds our feet to the fire to make sure we deliver for poor people in this country, a leader who inspires us every day, and that is Reverend William Barber, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a powerful voice of moral clarity for issues such as this. Bishop Barber, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Congressman Jayapal. And because of the time, I want to get right to the matter. And I want to suggest that this filibuster is about racism, but not just racism, because racism is not just about race. Race is the son of racism, and racist laws were put in place to keep Black and white people rights is put in place. So I want to talk too about the 140 million poor and low wealth people, 62 million who make less than $17 an hour, 60.9% of Black people, which is 26 million people, 30% of white people, which is 66 million people. And I could go on with the numbers if time allowed, whose lives are kept poor, kept in pain because of a filibuster. So I think we must say that this filibuster is about racism, classism, greed, and ruling class manipulation. And we must say that yes, the Republicans are doing some things, but the Senate, the 50 Democrats plus the vice president with that extra vote should end the filibuster. And Democrats, none of them should not be on the side of the filibuster. We had a young lady from the mountains of West Virginia the other day that wrote Senator Manchin. She happens to be white, and she challenged him on the filibuster. And he wrote back and said he was keeping up the tradition of Senator Byrd. And she wrote back, but Senator Byrd, when he did the filibuster, was a racist. So what we've got to do is recognize that this is about racism, classism, greed, and ruling class manipulation. The love of money is the root of all evil. Why is it that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and many businesses that give to organizations also heavily support politicians that believe in the filibuster? This way, they can act as though they support progressive agenda by funding organizations, but then they guarantee that the agenda will never come to pass legislatively by funding those very senators that support the filibuster. Just the other day, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce put out how it would support Democrats who would guarantee that they would not break this filibuster. We have to know this is about greed. It's about racism. This is about ruling class manipulation. We need to know that, yes, the filibuster has been used to block anti-slavery laws and to block civil rights and voting laws. And I'm sure that will be talked about plenty, but we also must expand our argument against it. And remember that the Taft-Hartley Right to Work Act, for instance, failed because of a bipartisan conservative filibuster in the United States Senate. We must remember that the women's suffrage was filibustered. We must remember that in 1974, a 5-year effort to pass a bill to create an independent consumer protection agency fell victim to the filibuster. We must remember that Southern conservative senators in 72, they blocked the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission through the filibuster. We must remember that parts of the New Deal were blocked because of the filibuster. Labor rights have been blocked because of the filibuster. The Protect Women's Act in 2014 from corporate interference was blocked by the filibuster. So the filibuster is about racism, classism, greed, and ruling class manipulation. And I believe we have to talk in that way so that we create a fusion coalition of people who are against the filibuster for how it affects Black people, brown people, indigenous people, Asian people, white people, people in Appalachia, people in Alabama. It is really about silencing the people, and anyone, whoever they are, whatever their party is that participates in the filibuster is at best an enabler of racism, classism, greed, and ruling class, a manipulator, or a direct participation in it. We know that what this is nothing more than what Dr. King called interposition and nullification. Interposition and nullification. 55% of poor and low wealth Americans voted for Biden Harris, voted to change the Senate, voted to change the Congress, and to allow an unconstitutional rule to be used by a minority to engage in blocking voting rights, living wages, health care, union rights, immigration reform, etc., is morally indefensible, morally indefensible, constitutionally wrong, and economically insane. Now, finally, my faith tradition, it is also sin. It is sinful to use the filibuster. You say, why? Because Isaiah 10, verse 1 and 3 says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights and make women and children their prey. The filibuster robs people of every race, creed, and color and sexuality of their fundamental rights in a democracy that's supposed to be one person, one vote. And as far back as the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton said it like this, and I close: to give a minority a negative upon the majority, which is always the case where more than a majority is requisite to a decision, is in its tendency to subject the sense of the greater number to that lesser. The filibuster has never been used to bring people together. It is Never been used to make a bill better. It has only been used to stop or weaken bills. And some people say, well, if Democrats end the filibuster, what about when they don't have power? Congressman Jayapal, I want you folks to think about this question. What if you end it? You might always have power, because you would finally do the things that the majority of people want done, and they would review you. Don't look at it at the negative. What if we end it and then we don't have power? Look at it, if you end it and then use the ending of it to do the things that need to be done, the majority of the people will know who delivered the things that impacted their lives, and they will reward you at the polls again and again and again. End the filibuster, do what's right for all Americans, and watch this country be lifted up to the greater places it ought to be.
Bishop Barber, thank you so much for that amazing, truthful call to action. And we've been talking a lot about the filibuster as a relic of Jim Crow segregationists, and someone who is incredibly well versed in the tactics of the Jim Crow era and the fight for civil rights, a leader in our country on this, is the president of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. Like all of our panelists, President Johnson is a tireless fighter for the rights of marginalized people and always provides insight and inspiration around issues like this. And after President Johnson, we're going to hear from Casey Close, a voting rights activist in Arizona, who will tell us about her experiences with voter suppression and why passing the For the People Act is so crucial to protecting the voting rights of marginalized groups. So let me start by welcoming you, President Johnson, to the floor, and it is yours. I think we might need you to unmute.
Good. Can you hear me now? Great. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity, and thank you for joining the lawsuit against Donald Trump and all those who created the attack on our U.S. Capitol, but most importantly, the treasonous thing that they did. Being in Mississippi, and I agree with everything Dr. Barber just stated, we understand also well the tactics of the South, the tactics of segregationists, but the tactics that have been used throughout a long period of time of this country to impede progress. When the South finally gained their footing, they took a course of action, starting with LCQ Lamar, to begin to modify the blow from the loss of the Civil War to try to gain footing of a Southern economy that was based on an agricultural, cheap and or free labor force. And they aggressively studied the rules of the Senate so they can have a disproportionate impact on public policy, despite the fact they never really had the numbers. That method was really perfected in the late 20s and through the 30s by tinkering with rules like the filibusters and cementing those rules to be a part of a Senate culture that had not been a part of the culture traditionally within the U.S. Senate. And as a result of tweaking with those rules, the filibuster became the most effective tool, along with the blue slip. And with the filibuster, we realized that they were able to cement structural racism like we had never seen before, whether it was Social Security, where Southern senators refused to support Social Security unless there was an exception to those who were qualified. That exceptions were individuals who were agricultural or domestic workers. 80% of African Americans at that time were agricultural domestic workers, so it was locked out of that process. Or when it was time to do a new policy to create wealth around home ownership, the filibuster threat, the threat of the filibuster was used to allow bankers and developers to have objective local standards to determine who would qualify for federally backed mortgages and who would not, which accelerated the concept of redlining and robbing so many communities from being able to enter the opportunity of building wealth through property ownership. The blue slip is another one of those segregation tools that by this time went from Hiram Eastland and Bilbo now to Senator Russell. Russell Senate Office Building is named after in Georgia that really used these tools effectively, and his apprentice, Lyndon Johnson, who became president but was a segregationist. And many of these individuals were former Klansmen. Many of these individuals were upholding the ways of the South so they can impede progress and growth, which included ensuring that we had universal health care. Now we stand in the midst of an opportunity to advance public policies that look more like America, to allow all of us to really appreciate the currency of our vote. That currency of our vote is how this democracy works. That currency of our vote also allow for the tax dollars that we put into the system that make society work. We, as working class people, pay more in our share of taxes than any other group. And yet corporate America have used our taxes to accelerate their profits. They have used the ability of rules like the filibusters to gain tax loops. And at the end of the day, they have used the rule of the filibuster to subvert democracy. And now we stand in the midst of the reality that they have become so emboldened that they would try to create treason. We must do away with the filibuster, because if we don't, we would allow a conservative movement that is treasonous in nature, white supremacist at the foundation, to overthrow the democracy that so many of our parents have invested in, that we are still investing in, to ensure we have a future that look like America and not an America that look like the past.
Thank you so much, President Johnson. Casey, you're on. We're so excited to have you.
Wonderful. Thank you, President Johnson, and thank you, Representative Jayapal, for inviting me to be here this evening. We know voting rights have been under attack in Arizona and across the country. This year, Arizona's lawmakers have introduced over 30 bills that would restrict voting rights, including bills that would purge people from our permanent early voting list, impose even stricter voter ID laws. The state legislature even wants to give itself the power to override the will of the voters and decide presidential elections. In 2016, voters waited hours in long lines just to cast their vote. In that election, the number of polling locations in my county was reduced from over 200 to just 60. I watched people defeated leave the polling site without having had the opportunity to cast their vote. I felt helpless. 2 years later, I had a choice. I could sit by and watch, or I could fight to combat these attacks. I knew I had to fight, to work to ensure even just one more person was able to vote. I volunteered with the Voter Protection Hotline throughout the early voting period and on Election Day, answering questions about our unnecessarily complex voter ID system, helping people find a polling place, and responding to people who were wrongfully turned away at the polls. This past unseasonably hot Election Day, I spent the day handing out water, snacks, pizza, and PPE to voters waiting in long lines. I remember working to keep people in line, even as the sun beat down on them, and feeding parents and their hungry kids at dinner time. All of it was worth it, knowing one more person was able to vote, because I know our process works best when voting is accessible and people are allowed to vote. Now, our senators have a choice. They can sit back and watch as states restrict our voting rights, or they can be brave and fight for us. They can pass the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and protect voting rights, but only if they eliminate the filibuster. Today, I'm calling on the Senate, including my senators, Senator Sinema and Senator Kelly, to be brave, to fight for us, and to eliminate the filibuster and protect democracy.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Casey, for your powerful words. If we hope to serve those who have not had a seat at the table, the first step is to make sure that they're fairly represented, and Republicans are not letting that happen, which is why we need to get rid of the filibuster. Now, improving representation has been one of the many pursuits of our next speaker, Rana Epting, the executive director of Move On. And Move On is an organization that is mobilizing millions of people to fight for social progress. One of the many issues that Move On supports is LGBTQ plus rights. So right after Rana, we're going to hear from Duke Burris, a member of the trans community and a resident of my home state of Washington, who reached out to me in support of the Equality Act. Rana, really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about the many ways the filibuster is stopping progress. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Representative Jayapal. It is an honor to be here with all of you this evening and to be talking about this critical challenge in front of us to progress in this country. I mean, you name it, common sense gun control, LGBTQ rights, immigration reform, representation in Congress for the over 700,000 residents of Washington, D.C., the right to vote, the right to have a voice in your workplace, police reform, so much more. You name it. Everything we voted for is on the line. And that's what we're talking about tonight. It's the policies, it's the change that we are demanding as a people, that 81 million people went to the polls for in November. How are we going to get that done? It's all urgent. These issues are just some of the issues that will go nowhere unless we change the rules in the United States Senate. Because here's the truth. The Senate is broken, folks. Republicans, through abuse and raw power grabs, have broken it, and we must fix it. And the best way to fix it is to eliminate the filibuster, which you've heard plenty about this evening. This isn't about a power grab between the Republican or Democratic Party. It is about giving power to the people and ensuring our government truly represents us. That's the whole point of government. And to do that, we need to end the reign of this dangerous tool called the filibuster that has been used and abused to repress the will of the people for generations. To make this point, I'm going to talk about two numbers. The first number is 81 million, over 81 million. That is how many people voted for Joe Biden for president, the most voters ever for presidential candidate. More than Obama, more than Reagan, both of the Bushes, more than Clinton, you name it. More than 81 million went to the polls and voted for Joe Biden. The second number is 41 million. That is how many more Americans, the Democratic majority, so Democratic senators in the U.S. Senate represent 41 million more people than Republican senators in the U.S. Senate, the minority. In other words, we won by a lot, and we are the majority, and it isn't even close. But Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans refuse to accept this reality. Here's the thing about Mitch. He likes democracy when it works for him, and he doesn't like it when it doesn't. When Republicans held the Senate, he believed that elections had consequences. We heard that all the time on the news. Now the Democrats hold the majority in the Senate. He believes elections should be ignored. He's actively blocking all of the progress we voted for. He just said it as much as yesterday, that he intends for the Republican caucus to aggressively block the Biden administration's policies at every corner. He is literally taking power away from the people and giving it to a handful of minority senators that don't represent the majority of this country. We are in the middle of a global pandemic and an economic crisis. We cannot afford this obstruction and gridlock that is the hallmark of Mitch McConnell's leadership and the Republican Party of today. They blocked COVID relief aid for 8 months last year. 8 months. He blocked consideration of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act last year, and he's trying to do it again. This is voting rights. The right to vote in this country, he's blocking that. In fact, Mitch McConnell blocked over 400 pieces of legislation last year, and he's doing it again. We are the majority. We won the majority. We must act like it. Now is the time for Democrats to act like it. We need to end McConnell's and the GOP's obstruction. We have to get to the work of passing bold and meaningful legislation to rebuild and restructure our economy, to reform our democracy so it truly works for us as individuals, as a people in this country, to address the climate crises, to work to end systemic racism, you name it. Progress is possible. We have the House, we have the Senate, and we have the White House. We can make change, but we have to harness that power that actually the voters gave us. And we can't allow Mitch McConnell Republicans to be obstructionists and get in the way. We have to end the filibuster, make significant change in this country that the people have been demanding for decades. So thank you for having me here tonight. We're going to do all we can to pressure the Senate to get rid of this arcane rule. And I want to thank you for hosting this event, Representative Jayapal.
Rana, thank you. That is right. We've got to use the power we have. And our next speaker has done exactly that by writing to me, by getting involved in the fight. And I'm so proud to have him as a constituent, so proud to welcome you, Duke Burris, to this town hall. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jayapal. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for that amazing speech. The founding of America forever changed the way that my life as a Black and Native American man would be experienced. Soon after, many of my ancestors, Natives and Africans, would be enslaved. I am Native, I am African, but I'm also a transgender man. LGBTQ people before me have managed to build, create, innovate, and despite being oppressed, help to mold our country into something a little better for everyone. Just as my demographic history has been hidden, so has my LGBTQIA plus history. BIPOC and LGBTQIA plus histories are great examples of why bills like the Equality Act are needed. BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. I've personally experienced harassment, abuse, and discrimination due to my trans truth and have had to quit my job because it got too hostile. The Equality Act will stabilize many people's lives as well as make stability accessible to everyone, regardless of who you are or who you love. Thank you.
Duke, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. And you know, I'm the proud mom of a trans kid. And so I just so deeply appreciate your voice in this struggle. Now, our next speaker is Jakari Harris, the executive director of the George Floyd Memorial Foundation. Last summer, our country was shaken to see the death of George Floyd at the hands of police, the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police. It provided clear, irrefutable evidence that there needs to be much more accountability for police in this country. Democrats saw the need for action and passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the House. Yet because of the filibuster, it is stalled in the Senate. Jakari, we're so grateful to you for everything that you are doing, and we'd love to hear why passing this bill is so crucial to the safety of Black and Brown communities.
Thank you so much and good evening. I'm Jakari Harris, the executive director of the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, founded by Bridget Floyd, the sister of George Floyd. And it's an honor for me to be here tonight representing the family. It has been a long year, as everyone knows, for the death of George Floyd and countless other victims. 1 year on, we as a foundation and supporters in communities around the world are asking what has changed. The George Floyd Policing Act is a critical step towards creating that change and reaching this vision that we fully support. We need this bill right now because there is no federal accountability and oversight. And this bill is a starting point for us to enact policies that will, one, limit the use of force of bans of no chokeholds, establish a national registry, require a reporting system of use of force, limited qualified immunity, and preventing other racial profiling on all levels of government, and requiring officers to complete training on racial profiling. This moment right here and this opportunity is truly needed to pass this legislation. And we know that this filibuster is just, it's ridiculous and it just needs to end immediately. We have everyday Americans and constituents all over the United States that is, counting on a policing act and the Representative John Lewis legislation as well. And this filibuster is just stopping it. But we know that together we can create change, and we will unite, and we will continue to demand for accountability and continue to ensure that this filibuster stops immediately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jakari. We really appreciate all your work, and we look forward to passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Now, there are so many brilliant leaders who have been in this struggle for justice for a very long time. And next up, we've got Maurice Mitchell, the executive director of the Working Families Party. Working Families is doing amazing work in communities across the country to make popular progressive policy a reality. And right after Maurice, we're going to hear from Anthony David Jr., a gun violence prevention advocate and a young leader from Washington, D.C. So Maurice, kick us off and talk about some of the challenges facing working families and how the filibuster helps us to resolve them.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Representative Jayapal, and everybody who spoke tonight, and also everybody who's watching at home. And I'm so grateful to discuss this issue because it gets at the heart of our democracy, the heart of civil rights, and all the things that keep us up at night as citizens, as parents, as partners, as community members. So when we talk about eliminating the filibuster, I want to start out by framing the state of play. There's a talking point that if we eliminate the filibuster, it's just going to embolden the GOP to be even more terrible than they already are. Look, that's not true. Those are fear tactics. The facts are this. A simple majority allows the GOP to pass the bulk of their agenda. Tax cuts and other spending measures only require 50 or 51 votes. Fealty to the corporate agenda doesn't require 60 votes or any compromise with Democrats. Democrats, on the other hand, cannot advance any civil rights or social justice legislation without the filibuster in place. Because getting 10 GOP senators to hand Democrats a victory on anything is unrealistic, untenable, and you heard Senator McConnell say that. So we know what the state of play is. And you've heard others address this. Now, Joe Biden came into office having to immediately get to work on a global pandemic, right? The passage of the relief package, that signaled a willingness to go big and bold on policies that meet the crisis head on. Now, we can't let up on the need for Congress to continue to deliver and go big and bold as it relates to voting rights, as it relates to our full agenda. Now, the relief package, to me, is proof of what Congress can do when pushed. And it's also a reminder that we expect the president and Senate Democrats and everybody in Washington to use every single tool in the toolbox to advance the agenda and to expand social justice. That includes eliminating the filibuster. And as Adam shared, the filibuster, we have to be clear, is a Jim Crow relic of the past. Now, voting rights, we're always at a crisis point. We knew this for years. Many of us have been working on voting rights for years. Now, when we see Black folks and other folks in our community and other folks in communities of color and poor folks triumph over ridiculously long voting lines, for example, or polling places that don't have enough functional voting machines, or having to wait long hours after polls close to cast a vote, we need to call it what it is. We shouldn't celebrate this. It is willful, intentional, institutional failure and voter suppression at work. For every person who waits online, there's one or more people who have to be at work, who have kids or other relatives to take care of. We cannot condition Black folks with that ridiculous sort of sense of Herculean effort, right, in order to every 2 years or 4 years to exercise our constitutional right. Our rights should be as easy to access as every American's rights are to access. Having the backs of Black folks means action now. In Republican-held legislatures across the country, we know that there are hundreds of bills moving in 43 states that would severely restrict access to the ballot. And they aren't even trying to hide the fact that this is about winning elections. It's not about integrity. It's about stopping Democratic voters from voting, full stop. They are openly saying it. Like in a recent Supreme Court case, Justice Amy Coney Barrett asked a GOP attorney what the interest was in keeping a provision that discriminates against minority voters. The attorney said this, I'm quoting the attorney. The attorney said, because it puts us at a competitive disadvantage relative to Democrats, politics is a zero-sum game, and every extra vote they get through unlawful interpretation of Section 2 hurts us. It's the difference between winning an election 50-49 and losing an election 51-50. It couldn't be more clear. They're trying to break the rules so that they can win elections. In Georgia, a bill that only a Jim Crow loving legislator would admire passed both chambers and was signed into law by Brian Kemp. And today, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed new voting restrictions into law. Now, while a similar bill is moving through the legislature in Texas and other legislatures all over the country, this isn't the beginning. This is the present and future if Democrats refuse to act. We can't have 50 states with 50 different processes for voting. Some states have proven over decades they cannot be trusted with the franchise. So Democrats have a clear choice. People of goodwill have a clear choice. It takes 51 votes and political will to end the filibuster. If Democratic senators care about we the people, and if Democrats care about we the people, and if we the people are convicted to defend our rights, then we know what we must do. We have to do everything in our power in order to eliminate the filibuster. I cannot stress this enough. Ending the filibuster is a literal life or death issue. So with that, I close and I thank you.
So right to bring in the urgency of what we're doing, the fact that this is life or death, and the fact that this is really about our power to be heard across the country. Thank you so much, Maurice. And Anthony, we are so excited to have you with us, and you more than anybody understand about life and death as well with all of the issues you're working on around gun violence. So my friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony David Jr., and I'm an executive council member and the Washington, D.C. lead for Team Enough, which is the youth-led gun violence prevention initiative of Brady. I am a native Washingtonian, and I have grown up and lived in D.C. my whole life. As you all are aware, D.C. is a beautiful, dynamic, and very diverse city. However, our city still bears a reputation of a dysfunctional and crime-ridden city. Many still remember DC as the murder capital after the number of homicides peaked in the late 1980s. While that specific moniker has a lot to do with racism, there is no denying that gun violence was and still is a serious issue in DC. DC saw a record number of homicides and shootings last year, just as many cities across the country did as well. In DC, homicide increased by 19% over 2019, the highest number since 2004, while shootings increased 33% over the prior year. 922 people were shot in DC in 2020 alone, so just last year. In response, DC Mayor Muriel Bowser declared gun violence a public health crisis, allotting $15 million and appointing a gun violence prevention director to coordinate and oversee the city's efforts to stop the violence. But this is long overdue and is only the bare minimum. All of these efforts are complicated because DC is still denied statehood, giving Congress the authority over our laws and gun restrictions. But gun violence still plagues my city, as it does every city, because of stalled action on Capitol Hill. This issue affects every American, as 44% of US adults say they personally know someone who has been shot, but also the fact that gun violence disproportionately affects Black Americans alone. In America, Black people are 10 times more likely to die from gun homicides than white people, as gun violence is the leading cause of death for Black youth. Black youth are 14 times more likely than their white counterparts to die from gun homicides. On the whole, gun violence decreases Black Americans' average life expectancy by about 4 years. Any other issue that killed an estimated 40,000 Americans every year would attract outsized attention and action from Congress. Yet movement on common sense gun violence prevention laws is stopped by the procedural filibuster in the Senate. The filibuster has literally cost lives. Federal gun violence prevention laws would help to close existing loopholes and prevent firearms from falling into the hands of those at risk harming themselves or others. Those changes would be life-saving and they would be popular. We know that anywhere from 80 to 90% of Americans support common sense gun violence prevention solutions like universal background checks. These laws would be effective, they would save lives, and the American people want them. The filibuster is standing in the way of that change. The House of Representatives has already passed common sense legislation, but for the second time in 3 years, that's 2 separate Congresses, the Senate has not yet brought these bills up for a vote because of the threat of the procedural filibuster. That arbitrary threshold, 60 votes, has stopped those life-saving and popular bills from becoming law. While we're speaking today, someone somewhere in this country is becoming a victim of gun violence. Over 100 people will have died from gun violence in the next 24 hours, unfortunately. We cannot allow outmoded rules like the filibuster to stop needed and life-saving actions. The Senate cannot be mirrored in action, and I'm here as a testament to the pervasiveness of this crisis. Every day we let the filibuster stop change, it costs lives and it hurts American families and communities. The filibuster is killing Americans every day in this country. We cannot let this be our reality, and I am asking the Senate and Congress to ensure that this will not be their legacy. Thank you so much.
Anthony, that was just amazing. You are amazing. We thank you for giving your time and your work and your activism to this issue. And you mentioned DC statehood as well. That's another bill we've already passed in the House to give DC statehood and to allow representation of people who live in DC. So we are so grateful to you for all of your work. Now, you know, we've been talking about the human cost of keeping the filibuster. I think you heard that from Anthony. You've heard it from so many of our speakers. If we can't protect kids from gun violence, what kind of a country are we? Should we have this antiquated rule of the Senate stop us from protecting our kids? Absolutely not. And when our kids become adults and search for a job, should we make sure that they have the right to fair wages and working conditions? Absolutely. And that is why I'm so proud to introduce our next speaker, someone who is a dear friend and inspiration to me when I watch her organize and fight for workers every single day. It gives me hope. And that is Sarah Nelson, the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants. Sarah is a brilliant union leader who makes sure that the 50,000 flight attendants she represents get the pay and the benefits they deserve. And right after Sarah, we'll hear from Zoe Mielner, who is currently working to unionize her workplace, but needs Congress to pass the PRO Act. We already did that in the House, but it's blocked in the Senate by the filibuster. But Zoe needs Congress to pass the PRO Act so that she has the tools to do the organizing she needs. So Sarah Nelson, so happy to see you, my sister. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Jayapal, and thank you so much for pulling this event together so that we can hear from everyone who needs this to be done, who needs to end the filibuster. This is not some arcane democracy rule. This is real people who are affected by this. And so I think about the mandate that we got almost 250 years ago. The first words of the preamble of our Constitution. We the people, not we the corporations, not we the billionaires, not we those building spaceships to escape Earth when it's on fire, but we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. And so, of course, I'm a union leader, so I love those words. But what that also says right there in our Constitution is that we have a mandate to recognize that we have to always work to make our world more perfect. Now, Mitch McConnell, everybody who talks about we can't give power to the other side if they suddenly have a slim margin of power. Mitch McConnell's way of doing business is tax cuts and making our government not work. I just came from meeting with the American Federation of Government Employees, the people who make our government run, the people who we know and heard their stories when the government shutdown was happening, the people who cut the Social Security checks that we count on and make sure that we have Medicare and get our tax refund checks and make sure our national parks are there for our children to run and breathe and explore and make sure that we are safe when we go on an airplane. So these are the government functions that we count on: mass transit and sanitation and our teachers. These are the government functions that we count on. And these are the things that the Republicans are very willing to take away through budget cuts, through government shutdowns, through reconciliation process. They don't need the filibuster to advance their agenda. Okay? The filibuster was not in our Constitution. It is not a part of our Constitution. And it is time that we reclaim the power for we the people. Because we have to pass the PRO Act. We have to pass the PRO Act because those Amazon workers who were taking on one of the richest men in the world and who can't even get a stool. They have to stand 10, 12 hours a day. They have to walk into that warehouse and walk up 4 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevators, because the elevators are reserved for the boxes that they have to stuff every 8 seconds, or else they are disciplined. They can't go to the bathroom without getting a note from their supervisor or being released from their job. And when they go to fight for their union, they have a video trained on a box that says that you're supposed to vote here. That's illegal. That's against our labor laws in the country, in this country today. But without the PRO Act, these corporations do not have to face any consequences. So the PRO Act will require immediate consequences for those with all the power who try to retaliate against workers who simply want to meet on a level playing field with their boss and get a fair shake at work. It will have immediate consequences for that. It will require that a first contract is met within a year through mediation and arbitration, if by no other means, because delay, distract, divide, and demoralize is what the union busters want to do to keep us down. It's what the war profiteers want to do to keep us silent and to keep all the power. So we will get those first contracts within a year, and it restores the right to strike so workers can say that my voice counts too. And you have to meet me fairly at the table for my labor. You have to treat my labor as valuable. You can't just say when I have to work and make me work overtime, but I get to say no and tell you that I need to go home to my family and not be afraid to lose my job. You have the full right to strike and take on your employer and have them meet you fairly at the bargaining table. You have rights regardless of your immigration status, so employers cannot hold that over your head and degrade the rest of work everywhere because they hold that retaliation against workers who are afraid for their families and afraid for themselves and being afraid of being torn apart. It stops the misclassification and gigification of our work. These are all the things in the PRO Act, and it matches up against the For the People Act so that we have the right to vote in this country. It matches up that mandate from over 250 years ago, from almost 250 years ago, that says we the people. This is our country. This is our democracy. We have to take it back. We have to end the filibuster. Now let's hear from a worker and one of the people that this really matters for.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Good evening. My name is Zoe Mielner, and thank you so much to Congresswoman Jayapal for hosting this event on such an important issue, one that is affecting all of our lives. Too long has the filibuster been weaponized against progress and used to stamp out the voice of the American people. Things that would help those living in this country are often stopped in their tracks. Things like the PRO Act. I have been working on a unionization campaign for over a year with many other amazing volunteer organizers. You may have heard of us. We are the Collectivo Collective. I worked at Collectivo Coffee for almost 2.5 years. Notice I use the past tense. I was working as a barista trainer after being promoted multiple times within the company. But soon after associating with the campaign to unionize, my position was eliminated and I was let go from the company. This happened to so many people at Collectivo and many of the organizers working for a better place. The workers at Collectivo had to endure multiple captive audience meetings with union busters from the Labor Relations Institute that were full of vitriol and misinformation. They've undergone gaslighting, threats, and dangerous policies during a global pandemic. They have had the owners of the company say, "I'm not allowed to say that we'll close the company if we lose the union election, but..." The workers who keep this country going are being taken advantage of and becoming more disenfranchised. The PRO Act will help balance the scales in terms of worker power, help us all build back up and create a more equitable workplace for all people, not just for bosses. This is not a political issue. This is a people issue. People are who make up the United States, and the legislation here should support them. The PRO Act is a much needed step and deserves support from all sides of the aisle. Thank you so much for hosting this event and for attending it to hear our stories. We're not outliers, and we have been unheeded for far too long. Thank you.
Zoe, thank you so much for your incredible work organizing and for your speaking today and just showing again the human impact. And Sarah Nelson was fabulous. I think she brought again that urgency to what we're dealing with. Now, this has been an amazing town hall. We've had such remarkable speakers, leaders from across the country, leaders of unions, leaders of organizations, and leaders like Zoe and Anthony who are in their communities organizing. And, when I think about the filibuster, I think a lot of people may not even know that this procedural thing exists in the Senate, where just for a certain group of pieces of legislation like gun reform and civil rights and immigration reform, you need 60 votes in the Senate. But that was not always the case, and that does not have to be the case. And in fact, there have already been many changes, including the one that Republicans made to allow Supreme Court justices to be appointed with only 51 votes. So that's what we're talking about. Democrats in the Senate with 51 votes can end the filibuster and must end the filibuster, because it's clearer to me than ever before that voters across America came out because they expected us to deliver. They came out in record numbers, not just to vote out Donald Trump, but to elect leaders in the House, the Senate, and the White House, and give us a governing majority to move this country in a fundamentally different direction. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to follow through on that promise. The promise to protect our children and our grandchildren from the ravages of climate change. The promise to ensure that every single worker in America earns at least $15 an hour, enjoys good benefits, and can join a union. To achieve genuine democracy in this country by finally giving our people the right to vote, ending voter suppression, protecting our election system, and getting money out of politics. The promise to protect people of color and our LGBTQIA community from discrimination and violence. The promise that our children can go to school safely without the constant fear of gun violence and mass shootings. This is the society that all of us are trying to build together. This is the moment for us to go forward together and to raise our voices so that the United States Senate becomes an institution that advances our democracy and enacts the policy that the vast majority of Americans need, rather than suppressing democracy and thwarting the ambitions and aspirations of the people. Ending the filibuster is not just some change in a technical procedural rule in Washington that nobody cares about. It is absolutely essential to building the country that we want to see. So I want to thank all of our participants today: Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois, California Senator Alex Padilla, Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri, NAACP President Derek Johnson, Move On's Ronna Epting, Maurice Mitchell of the Working Families Party, President of the Association of Flight Attendants Sarah Nelson, and Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign. And special thanks to our activists and organizers around the country: Casey Close, Duke Burris, Zoe Mielner. We are so grateful for all the amazing work, Anthony, for all the amazing work that you do every day, day in and day out in your communities. Thank you, everybody. Get educated on the filibuster, advocate on ending the filibuster, and join us in fighting for progress for America. Thank you.